Hello, everybody, and welcome to A Soulful Revolution, a podcast at the intersection of spiritual transformation and social change. I'm your host, Lauren Grubaugh-Thomas, a priest, writer, spouse, and twin mama living in Colorado on Arapaho and Cheyenne homelands. Every episode, I feature a conversation with a soulful revolutionary, someone whose commitment to justice is nourished by their spiritual beliefs, values, and practices, and whose approach to spirituality is clarified by their courageous engagement in the world. My guest today is Dr. Norma Ramírez. Dr. Ramírez is a bicultural, bilingual, Spanish-English, undocumented, licensed psychologist in California and Nevada. She's the clinical director at an immigration nonprofit where she provides free therapy and immigration mental health evaluations and maintains a small private practice too. She's a staunch advocate for the immigrant community, which is exemplified by her role as a plaintiff against the Trump administration for illegally rescinding DACA in 2017. Dr. Ramírez, I am so honored to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I want to begin by asking you what it means to you to live at this intersection of spiritual transformation and social change.
Well, I think it's hard. It's very challenging. I remember many years ago at one of the church I was attending, before going to Fuller, where my pastor at the time said that many people said that God didn't work the way that he worked or they worked in the Bible. The people believe that, right? Like God doesn't work this way anymore. But he said that it was because people didn't believe in God the way that the people in the Bible did. And I kind of took that to heart, and I told God, like, take me wherever you want to go, but you have to be there. And I think that's one of the prayers that God will definitely listen to. And so I think that's kind of been the theme after that. I've gone to places that I never imagined I would be at, and I've never been alone.
I'd love to hear more about your background, to how you arrived at this place as a psychologist who is actively engaging as an undocumented person yourself with DACA recipients, fellow DACA recipients, and other folks in the immigrant and refugee community. What brought you into this work that you do, which is so spiritually rich, clearly for you, so informed by your spirituality, and also is a really courageous work to do, especially in the times that we're living in.
Yeah, when it comes to DACA, for the people that may not know, DACA was a program that was introduced in 2012 by President Obama through a lot of activist pressure. And basically, there's been different waves of immigration. First, you could say it was the fathers who came to the United States, but then after, I think it was after the Bracero program or NAFTA, I forget which one, people could no longer come in and out of the United States. Now you could, now that was prohibited. And so what that meant was that the fathers typically stayed in the United States longer. And so that was the first wave of family separation, we could say. And then later, it was families coming to the United States. And so there's, a whole generation of children who came to the United States when they were young. Average age was 5 years old, but it could be, 13 years old, whatever. We basically lived undocumented in the United States for all that time until 2012. And so what this program does is that it gave us a work permit and protection from deportation. And so with the work permit, we were able to get a social security number, but only for work. And depending on the state that you're in, we could get a driver's license, things like that. So It was the first time that we were recognized really in the United States. And so that happened when I was 22 years old. Mm-hmm. So this was after already, thinking about college, whether I could go attend or not. It was after learning how to drive, can I do the same things that my peers were doing at the time? How it came into this is because I was affected, honestly. I don't think it's something that I would have chosen. I've said that I think I became an activist by accident. I was surrounded by people who were engaged, and also at a place I started working at this nonprofit where like news reporters would come, stuff like that, when DACA came out and asking for interviews. And so I don't know, I was willing to talk. That happened, and I think part of the way that my activism developed was within an institution. So after DACA came, at that point, I was very close to graduating. So a couple years later, I graduated from undergrad, and then I had to, figure out what to do. I got my bachelor's in psychology, but if anybody knows, you can't really do much with a bachelor's in psychology. And for some reason, I was like, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a psychologist. I did apply to UNLV and to Fuller. And for some reason, I missed the deadline for UNLV. But I did get into Fuller, and so my activism started there for myself personally, in terms of, even though everybody believes that California is really progressive and knowledgeable about, these different issues, there's tiers to that, because Fuller is a private institution. It calls for certain kinds of people, I think, to attend that kind of school. And so no one knew what DACA was until I was able to speak to my advisor, and she was the first person who knew what it was. And because of the job that I had at that time, I was a DACA caseworker, so I knew how to explain what DACA was. I knew how to tell people, this is my situation. And you were actually one of the first people that I met when I arrived to Fuller. And so I told you that story as well. And so that's kind of how it started. And later, because I think of the narratives that we have as a country of who is worthy and who isn't, when during his first presidential run as president, Donald Trump promised to take away DACA, and he did. And so in 2017, there was many lawsuits that came up, but I was asked to join a lawsuit that was specifically by DACA recipients. The other lawsuits were organizations or the state or things like that. And so because I knew of the mental health implications, everything that's tied to a work permit, right? So from one day to the next, depending on how they decided to end the program, you could lose your job. And people already had started developing or living their lives in 2-year terms, but still, with that hope of I'll be able to keep renewing. I decided to join. And that's what happened. We went all the way to Supreme Court. We won. During the same week that that was happening, I had to propose my dissertation, apply for internships, and then go to Washington, D.C.
Okay, I didn't know that was all happening concurrently. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, my grad school years were basically enmeshed with the lawsuit. And so we won. But then, there's Texas, who was like, oh, hey, look, this is how we can end the program. Because our lawsuit was on that. The argument was that the way that the administration took away the program was illegal, not that the program itself was legal or not. Okay. And so then Texas was like, hey, so then this is how we can have our argument. And so they went after the program, stating that it's illegal. And now 2 courts have said that the program is illegal, but if you have DACA, you can continue renewing, which I think also tells you there's this weird, the way that I see it is that they know that it's not illegal, because if it was, then you're going to want to stop the program completely, right? Mm-hmm. But it also benefits the country, because imagine, what's going to happen if, I don't know, at least now maybe say 500,000 people stop working. Yeah. That's going to have a huge impact. And it's massive. Not people that stereotypically people think farm workers or janitors and stuff like that, which it's not a bad thing, right? But because of DACA, we've been able to go through basically any sector of the workforce. And so you're going to lose teachers, lawyers, psychologists, doctors, whatever, every sector. And so that's the reality. It's this weird reality of, we want you for what you can do, for what you can do for us, but we don't really care about you as a person for you to get the benefits and just to treat you as a person.
That's the opposite side of a quote that I'm looking at right now in front of me. My mom has this quote that she likes to say, and she made me a piece of art that says, "You're not what you do. You're a beloved child of God." And I'm really curious for you with this dichotomy that you live with of this deep belief that you described in God, and on the other side of that, society effectively is saying that you're only worth your utility. You're only worth what you bring to the economy. How do you forge ahead living with that deep chasm between the world that we're living in and the kind of belief in God? I'm curious to hear more about your theology, I think. Just what it is that helps you to keep moving forward, not just for yourself, but for your community when living in this state of the world that we do and of this country.
I mean, I think my time at Fuller was really significant because there was just no way that someone like me with no way of funding, with no way of like any kind of resources like my peers had, I could not have made it through just by not saying anything. And so I've also been someone who's very open, and whatever you ask me, I tend to answer, because I think the conjunction of me, like I said, being able to describe my situation and stuff like that, I received a lot of help. And I received a lot of help and support, somewhat ironically, or somewhat, I don't know, maybe there's a weird sense of humor here, but from the very same people who were the ones, we could say, in society making my life difficult, right? Because it's a seminary, it's an evangelical Christian seminary, right? The majority of the people were white people. I got a bit of everything, I think. I got a lot of help. I think I made also a lot of people uncomfortable. I did notice there was a point where I could have started to hate specifically white people. And that was like around the end of my first year at Fuller. But then I came to the realization that if that were the case, like, I just wasn't going to survive, right? Because how I would be filled with so much hatred throughout this, And it's a 6-year program.
Like it was it was a strategic, life-preserving decision.
Right. And also around that time, that was when people started to come up and show support for me because they heard about my story and stuff like that. And so it was this conjunction of I need to be able to open myself up to being wrong, to for people to show who they are, right? And then coming to the realization that in terms of people, race is not a determining factor of whether we're good people or bad people or where we come from and those kinds of things. And it does shape our experiences. It does shape, right, the things we talk about with privilege and oppression, but it doesn't necessarily tell us what kind of a person is. And so then that started this piece of okay, whoever wants to, befriend me or come to me or whatever, I'll give them a chance and they'll show me whether, they're willing to join in the kind of life that I have, which then leads to the other part that my life just doesn't make sense. I've tried for many years now to find some kind of logical, some kind of explanation as to how my life works. And it doesn't, through Fuller, I never had the kind of money that I needed to have. I think my first 2 years I did have my own living space, but then I couldn't afford that either. And so it just wasn't something where my life makes sense. And I thought that after I graduated, maybe it would start making some sense. But it turns out it just got weirder. Then the invitations to the White House happened and stuff like that. And I'm just okay, I can't predict any of this. And that's the humor side of it. But then the other side of it is I'm a professional and I can't do the things that my peers can do. I can't go travel. I can't, just say I'm going to go to this conference because I can't. I have to apply 6 months in advance, which I barely know what my life is going to look like 2 weeks from now. So it just makes it very difficult. Even seeing other professional, colleagues speak about or do research on immigration related things, but when they're no longer affected, advocate and stuff like that. When you are affected, is different.
That place of vulnerability is something I wonder if you'll share more about. Advocating for justice, for your community, for people who are DACA recipients, for immigrants, from that very place of vulnerability, especially as we're entering into another Trump presidency with all of the risk that entails. Like, you've been here before. This is not your first rodeo. And there's just all the heightened risk of being able to be somebody who's vocal about justice, just in general. To be somebody who's outspoken in these times is increasingly risky and vulnerable. And so I hear you saying that there's not very many people who are contending for DACA recipients in the way that you have as a person who continues to be a DACA recipient. And that's something that I'm always really curious about, like, to be able to hold our stories with great honor, being able to be kind and gracious to ourselves in the midst of that vulnerability. So yeah, would you share more about how you care for yourself in the midst of the tenuousness and the ambiguity of the life that you're describing of being a DACA recipient, and how you also continue to do this work of advocating for others? What fuels you? What gives you courage?
I mean, I think those questions have different answers depending on when you catch me. You mentioned that it wasn't my first rodeo. It's not, but it's also after, a one-term Trump administration and all the work and everything that was chaos that was happening during that time, plus finishing grad school, plus, all of these things. And so this time around, when he was elected, I was tired. I was like, all right, I'm done. That was my first instinct, because even though, at least for me, when he was first running for presidency, I was like, he's going to win. A lot of people around me did not believe that. I was at Fuller. They're like, no, he can't win. There's no way that people are going to elect him. And I was like, okay. And then he was. And so this time around, it was like, it wasn't that it wasn't possible. It's like, no, like, people really can. But it was a bit of like, okay, we had a first term. And people are like, yes, we want that again. And not just that again, but we want more, you know? And so, yeah, it's just, that was devastating. I really just stopped being very present, in terms of like online or any kind of discourse and stuff like that, because to some degree, it just really felt like speaking to a void of like, we've been doing this for so long and it didn't matter enough to not elect them. He's not the answer to all of this, but he's just a very good example of all the work that, or not all of the work, maybe all of the work, I don't know, but just that it was not enough, whatever that was. And I look at the whole structure, and I know that our system is designed to keep us busy, to keep us tired, to really only focus on our own survival. Like, that is the intention. But I'm like, but there's, I don't know. So many people have told me that they care about me. So many people have told me, that I've made an impact on their lives and all of this. And not necessarily DACA recipients themselves, but people who are not affected, or citizens who have more social privilege than I do. And I'm like, and so what does that mean? Do I only matter to inspire people in some way, to make them feel better about themselves, about their lives? I did have someone tell me that. Well, so they told me that my story helped them feel better about their immigration story, because their immigration story was not as bad as mine. I don't want to be an inspiration. I don't want to uh, motivate people to be better people. Um, I think that's a personal thing. I think that's something that you figured out in your life with your community, because then that means that I need to stay here. You know, that means that I have to keep suffering in these ways that are not necessary, so that you can continue to be inspired.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say there's a consumption about that, like the way we consume stories,
Mm-hmm.
inspiration porn, people sometimes say, but it's the opposite of solidarity. It's the opposite of contending for community, community survival, community flourishing. And that leads me to wonder about the work that you do, that where you're providing pro bono services for folks who are DACA recipients, for immigrants, for refugees, and I wonder about the offering of your story, like what that looks like. You do share with people, even on your website, that this is, it's coming from a place of authenticity to your story and experiences to be able to connect with folks who are going through similar situations. But I wonder, the ways in which, vulnerability about your story informs your practice as a psychologist.
Right. Um, so, in terms of professionally as a psychologist, that varies. So, if someone finds me through the website, of course they know. But for example, I think and also this is an update that I am no longer in that program. It was grant funded. The funding ended. But for 9 months, we were offering free therapy services and free psychological immigration evaluations. They didn't know necessarily about my story. They were just like, hey, this is a free service that I've been wanting, and and it's in Spanish, so they come for it.
Yeah.
And I generally don't have to disclose that about myself. Like, it's like if you go see a therapist, like, you'll know if they understand you based
Yeah.
on the conversation, based on the feedback, right? And so that's how that's built. It's a report that's built. The services were being provided at an immigration nonprofit. So the conversation about their immigration status was already there. It wasn't something awkward for me to say, and when did you come to the United States or something like that? Like, um, that was normal. Yeah, the vulnerability or the explicit vulnerability doesn't necessarily have to be there. But I think for myself, as being, we talk about therapy where the therapist is the tool through which change happens. It means that I have to be very mindful and conscious about what's going on with me, especially when all of these things are being touched, right? Specifically when my clients don't know that I'm also affected. And so, yeah, I just think it's just, I have to be very mindful of my work to make sure that, to the best of my abilities, I'm not, um, causing more harm or perpetuating harmful practices.
What are you finding supportive for yourself in those moments where where something gets activated in you, where your own experiences are feeling deep resonance? I'm asking this as I'm curious about, so many of us right now are feeling ourselves really activated as we're seeing all these executive orders come through that affect either us directly or people that we love directly, whether that's related to immigration or the LGBTQ community. Just, in the last 24 hours, the kinds of things that are coming through. And I remember for me during the first Trump presidency, how easy it was to be reacting to every single thing that was said and done by this administration. And that did not serve my mental health well. and it created the kind of exhaustion that you're describing heading into this presidency right now. And so I'm wondering for you, as you're sitting there hearing stories from clients, or you're seeing the news coming out about the kind of executive orders that will affect the immigrant community, what are some of the tools that you rely upon to be able to sustain yourself, to find grounding, to return to your sense of self, in the, larger cosmic order, however you understand that.
Well, I think I first want to say that I don't think there's a right way to do
Yeah.
any. And that I think we're probably going to try and figure out like, does this work for me? Does this not work for me? What combination? If there is one, at least personally for me, this sort of existential question of like, am I even really doing this well enough? Because I am tired, because I am burnt out, because yeah, I'm still here, but does that mean that I've somehow figured it out? I don't think so. But what I can offer though is that one of the things that I've learned through just through this journey is that the more that we avoid reality, the more that we build defenses, the more that we become unhealthy, if we could put it that way. So, one way to think about it is, so anxiety comes from fear, right? From like, hey, there's danger and those kinds of things. But if we don't face the fear, which in this case is not a tiger, it's policy, it's how people react, there's a different kind of threat, right? Like you're not going to be mauled over by facing this reality. And so if we don't face that, then I think we have things like, you know what, I'm not going to deal with it. Someone else can deal with that. Maybe falling into it's us or them, or we'll be fine. Let's not worry about it. Like all these other ways of not engaging because they are a threat. It is true that, and I think we can kind of know that as people if we take a look at it, because like I said, this system is designed to keep us in survival mode, right? So like what happens if I stop looking after myself? What happens to me, right? Which is counterintuitive to say, well, you're actually stronger if you do stop looking at yourself all the time and focus on how to build community, focus on how to, get to know the people around you. But it takes work. Like you have to actually confront that and confront all the things that come up in order to be able to then take that next step. And so I think for me, being able to recognize the possibilities, right? That someone like Trump could be elected, that people exist in my community and throughout the whole United States that want him to be elected, that is real. That helps me to at least be more grounded in a way, to not necessarily be shocked. It's still devastating, but it kind of takes away this weird magical fear of them, if that makes sense.
Being able to say, this is what the tiger is. Like, it's not a tiger, but here's the reality we're facing. Being able to name that reality and see it clearly for what it is.
And then building, the emotional capacities to recognize, like, wow, this is what it is, and to feel it. I've had to do a lot of feeling these last couple of years. And so I write, I listen to music, I draw, I have conversations with friends who are able to have these conversations. And then at some point, I just know the next step for me. This is the next step I'm going to take, whether it's the right one, whether it's destiny or whatever, I have no idea. But this is the one I can take.
Just as you're describing that, I'm feeling the groundedness of that process, being able to sit with the feelings as challenging as they might be of anger, of grief, of fear, and recognizing them and finding yourself in community with people that you trust who can hold those feelings with you. That feels like such a grounded way to be able to make a choice about what is yours. That seems like an antidote to the reactivity that's so natural. Like it's biologically so reflexive to do that. Yeah, that just feels like a really beautiful invitation into a more responsive way of being in these times that are so reactive. And where, like you said, where the whole system fuels that reactivity, where social media fuels that reactivity, where the fear-based politics fuels us to just react till we're completely taxed. Yeah, thank you for that offering.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not easy, explaining it is easy. Going through it is hard. Like I said,
Yeah.
in those moments where I do feel angry or just devastated, like I do go through it. It's not just like, I feel sad. Okay, now I'm better. Like, no, it's a whole process to digest and process those feelings and then figuring out, who do I want to be? What do I want to, what kind of decisions do I want to make, even though I'm feeling devastated?
Does that process, is that a big part of what allows you to live with the ambiguity of not just being a DACA recipient, but like our whole society, like just the whole meltdown, the whole world on fire, is that one of the ways that you're able to just be with what is?
I think it's a part of it, yes. There was a time in my life where I was very, very depressed, like when I was like in my teens, moving on forward until Fuller, actually have like my episodes, of depression, and I'd be like, okay. And it was also around the time where I started going to church, and at that time, what I was being told is like, God will, take that away from you, kind of thing. So I'd get depressed, and I would pray, and I would, ask God to help me and those kinds of things, and then I would feel better. And then I would think, okay, like that's the last time. I'm not gonna feel that way anymore. And whenever I would feel like I was getting depressed again, I would try to fight it and those kinds of things, and then it didn't work. And so I went through that a couple of times. And then I got to Fuller. One, I was really scared that I was the only depressed person in my program. And I was like, oh no, like they're going to find out. Going through that program, like it is exhausting. You're doing like 15 things at once. And I was like, I don't have the time. I don't have the energy to fight my depression. I'm just going to be depressed. And it was interesting because once I stopped spending that energy on not trying to be depressed, I was able to do the things I needed to do. But secondly, it just didn't take up so much space in my life anymore. And then it was just kind of like, it allowed me to have more emotional experiences. So even if I was depressed, I could still be happy. I could still make jokes. I could still connect with others, knowing that, hey, I'm probably still sad, but it's fine. And so that actually has stayed through in terms of like, I just feel what I feel, and I'm not going to fight it. I can take a moment, to reflect and see what's going on. But at some point, I'm going to feel better again, or I'll feel differently again, and then I'll feel sad again. And so it's just, that has been something that has kept.
I'm curious to hear more about the communities that you've been part of and the ways that you've been supported on this journey of being who you are and of finding the ways that you uniquely inhabit spirituality and social change and being a psychologist who's supporting folks in figuring that out for themselves. What you've mentioned a couple of the communities on your journey at Fuller, the community of DACA recipients that you're part of. What are the ways that community has supported you along the way that have been helpful? And then maybe what are some of the lessons learned for community where you've been able to, support folks in some of their unlearning of what's not helpful?
Yeah. So some of those communities just overlap. But I think, first of all, I have to say, it's always been my parents, who, for whatever reason, they always believed in whatever I decided to do. They never really had something specific of like, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer, nothing like that. They were just like, whatever you want. And they were always very supportive, and making sure that in whatever way they could, that they would not be an obstacle for me to pursue my education. So that's first. And then, I have my best friend who, throughout the whole process, was always there, which was really important. And then I have like a community of people here, like in Las Vegas, that friends, and also like I said, the immigration nonprofit where I worked at. My boss at the time was always very supportive, and they helped create a fundraiser before I left for Fuller to try and fundraise something. And again, we stayed connected throughout the years. And then while I was at Fuller, a lot of people were just really helpful in very practical ways. Like I said, there were times where I just didn't have the funds, and so there's the community that was just very helpful in providing those practical needs. But then also there were people who were willing to engage more in terms of like relationship, in terms of like, hey, what is happening, what is going on. And so some of the things that were challenging were that I started to notice was, for some reason we have this hierarchy of like, if I'm helping you, then it's kind of like this, like it's the helper and the receiver. And I was like, wait a minute, like maybe you can help me with this practical things, but it doesn't mean that I have nothing to offer. And so let's even this out a little bit more. And so there's people that were willing to do that, and there's other people that weren't. And that came along with other things. I've had friends from Fuller who have come to visit me in Las Vegas, and that's been great. Because that is that leveling of like, hey, I can provide whatever I can, and you can stay here and I can host you, and it's not just you giving me whatever it is. And so those things are challenging. There's also one of the things that I realized, which it's hard to communicate because this was like near the end. I did notice that it was never something explicit, but there was a bit of an expectation of like, if I have given to you, right, given something, whether it was Fuller because of funding, because I don't know, housing or whatever it is, or helped in some way. There was this sense of like, I have some kind of right, some kind of ownership over either me, my story, something about me, right? So I did feel like with one hand they gave, and with one other hand they took. So that's something that I myself have been trying to be mindful of in terms of when I offer help, that it is just offering help and that I'm not having any kind of strings attached to that support.
That's such an important insight for the culture that we live in, where capitalism really creates this reciprocity expectation of you do something for me and there's a quid pro quo, where there's these power dynamics that get created of, like you owe me respect or honor, or it's not always tangible, but there can be these emotionally laden expectations. And I wonder, now that you're in your practice as somebody with a doctor of psychology, like working with communities of folks who are actively being targeted and harmed and have, have vulnerability that you're intimately familiar with. Practically, what are some of the ways that you are addressing that power differential?
One of the ways is that I try to be very explicit of just what my process is. From the moment that we start talking, I explain, this is what you can expect from me in terms of just maybe what the therapy process looks like. So, like in the first couple of sessions, it'll be us getting to know each other. Not in the same way. I'll get to know you in terms of like your history, the reasons why you're coming. I'll ask a lot of questions in the first couple of sessions. And you'll start to get to know me in terms of how I work. And so that tends to help with the expectation of what it'll look like. And I tend to ask, at the end, how was this? Do you have any questions? Was there something that didn't work or did I miss? So that's that part. But then there's the other part of whenever appropriate, I think, because it's not like a checklist, but I do, bring out that there is a power differential depending on whatever it is that we're talking about. Sometimes it comes up. For example, sometimes it comes up in terms of if I'm asking, how does this feel, or if I'm kind of going a bit more, wanting to talk more in depth about something, and if I notice that maybe there's some hesitancy or maybe some like maybe they're like unsure about something, I let them know like, hey, you don't have to answer my questions. Like, I'm asking because it seems relevant. But if you feel within yourself that this is not something that you want to talk about, like you don't even have to give me a reason, or you feel like you're not ready, whatever that is, like you can say, hey, like I don't think I want to talk about this right now. Just because I'm the psychologist, it doesn't mean that I know what's best for you. And so we work together. So I work really hard to create that therapeutic alliance so that it really does feel like we're a team. And I let them know that I can make mistakes, and that I may not always know when I make mistakes. And so if they could help me out with that, I would appreciate it. And that I would do my best to hear them.
Well, I recognize you empowering folks to do that work of recognizing like I guess attuning into intuition and the wisdom that your client has of what they're feeling and what they need, and to be able to then name that, which is just an incredible agency, just that's a real recognition of their agency.
Yeah, I make sure to really let them know that. So one of the examples I use is like it's like we're driving a car. You're the driver, but I'm more like the GPS. But you're the one deciding where we go, and I'm just letting you know what I know and how to get there. And then in practice, because if you're not accustomed to hearing, to one, speaking your needs, and then two, to have them be respected, it's going to be hard to do it in general. When I notice it, I bring it up and I mention, hey, I'm noticing that maybe this is not something you want to talk about, or something is happening. I'm not quite sure what it is. And so that opens up the conversation. And I have had moments where they're like, yeah, I don't think that's what I want to talk about right now. And so I'm like, okay, we can stop here and we can move in whatever direction you'd like to.
I want to talk more about that piece of agency in terms of agency not being respected, because I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of, again, I hate that we're circling back around this president over and over again, but here we are. Like, this is the reality in front of us.
Day two.
Here's the
It's
tiger.
gonna be-
It's day 2. We're recording this just after the inauguration. And so I've been reflecting a lot over the last year or so as it became like you. I was like, yeah, there's a good chance he wins again. And I started thinking a lot about the ways in which protest is in and of itself ineffective, is not sufficient. Because protest is about persuading people to do what you want them to do. And this is not a system, as you say, it's not, that he represents, not just him. This is not a system that actually respects our agency as we express what we need as human beings in community who want to flourish. And so I'm curious about how your advocacy, how you're thinking about your advocacy in this time. You last time that DACA was on the chopping block, you participated in a lawsuit that ended up preserving that program. And I'm wondering about how you're thinking about other ways to be able to use your agency, particularly when it comes to your agency not being respected by these systems that we inhabit.
On a personal level, it's about really looking at, okay, what is my agency? What can I do? Like, what can I actually do, right? Not what do I want to do, but I can't. And so one of the ways that looks like is that, at least right now, I can have my private practice. I can do the kind of work that I want to do. So part of that is like, okay, I have to build up my private practice. I've always had the sense, like I said, even in terms of money has never been really the deciding factor in terms of what my life looks like, which again, it doesn't make a lot of sense. For a lot of people, that is a very important deciding factor. But if I'm at a place where I'm able to do the work that I love and to be able to live off of it, then that also means of how to manage that and how to make sure that whatever I have, that it doesn't stay with me. Like, I don't want to amass, funds. I want it to pass through me. And so
That same idea of understanding, like the psychologist or the therapist that you mentioned earlier, right? Like being a tool.
mm-hmm. Right. And so, I know that there's big organizations, there's a lot of things, right, where there is money that goes to them. So then part of my thing is like, okay, who are the people that are not getting that attention? Who are the people, maybe individuals or whatever needs, right? Like how can then I help in that way? And some of that, honestly, is just it's going to vary based on whatever ability I have.
Yeah.
But that's part of the goal that I have is like, okay, I need to make this work for these reasons. And so that's like that personal level. And that can change depending on whatever happens, right? Because I am still someone that is impacted by whatever, he may decide to do whatever he sets out to do. And so that can look different. If I'm here, I've thought about like, well, what if I leave, go back to Mexico? And the weird, again, irony of that if I go back to Mexico, I'll be returning, but I'll be at a better place than most Mexicans, and definitely at a better place than if my family had stayed. So, every decision comes with like, okay, I need to take a moment to process this. But yeah, so it's holding a lot of possibilities of what my personal life could look like and in the ways that I could move. When it comes to other people, I think it's that I sit with them. I don't try to tell them like, okay, yeah, that is what you're struggling with, but like think about it this way. Um, I don't do that. I actually tend to like validate that and from what I know, bring in even more structures of like this is why what you're saying makes sense. And I have found that most of the time people tend to feel validated and they themselves come back up. Like it's not up to me to tell them when to stop feeling sad or when to stop feeling whatever it is that they're feeling. Once they feel understood and recognized, I notice that they do it themselves. And so then from there it's like, okay, well, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? And that's how we end up figuring out the places of their agency and how they want to move.
That phrase, this is why what you are feeling makes sense, feels like such a honoring, relational, non-hierarchical statement to make in the face of somebody is in a situation that can't be fixed, where there is no easy fix. I just really appreciate that language and that way of respecting the person who's in front of you and their unique story and feelings and around it, because it's so easy to just, well, for me, it's so easy just like, oh, I want to fix it, I want to make it better, and most of the time we can't. Like there may be something practical that we can do to support somebody, whether that's financial, or that's providing space to somebody who may need it, or that's using our physical resources in different ways, or simply our time and our presence. Like these are all things that we can offer, but at the end of the day, there's so much that we can't do. We can't really do that journey of feeling the deep feelings for somebody. That's we can join along points on the way sometimes as we're invited in. So that idea of, yeah, just being able to bear witness and honor the experiences and the validation of it makes sense why you're feeling what you're feeling. That's really
Right.
beautiful.
And the work that you have to do being on the other side of not experiencing whatever it is that they're experiencing, right? To be able to say, you know what, you're right, it makes sense. And look at it, this is why it makes sense. Like, it takes work. It takes work to be able to do that. In some ways, being able to fix something, to say, here's, whatever, $50 to do whatever it is you got to do. Sometimes that's more for us, right? Like, this I can feel good about myself, and this is over. I don't have to worry about it anymore. I don't have to think about why they're in this situation and why the system is working the way it is and all of those things, right? And so when people you start talking about protests, there's a lot of questions of like, well, what do you do? How can we support this community? And early on, the first thing that I said was like friendship. Like, What we need is actual friendships, actual relationships, because, the reason why, part of why Trump has gotten as far as he has gotten is because people, Republicans, like, they care deeply, they love deeply, and they love like their families and themselves very deeply, and they're very loyal, and they're willing to put their lives on the line for their interests, for their family. Why can't we do that? Why are we so dissociated from each other, right? We kind of have intellectualized what it means to be sort of more progressive, or there's different labels, right? Liberal, Democrat, whatever. But there's no actual knowing of each other in these communities. Whereas I think on the other side of where they're coming from, I think they know each other very well. If there's a policy that comes out, because this happens when I was at Fuller, they knew about immigration because I was there. I have noticed that now that I'm not there, they don't really know a whole lot. And so some people might keep sort of an ear out, but it's just not the way it was, because the person that was being impacted that they knew is not giving them that information anymore. But what if you cared? What if you built community with people, with several people? Because I'm pretty sure that I was probably the only undocumented person that people knew, in that community. And it's like, but it's not just me. And I definitely do not represent not even the majority of us. So, or what if you actually had a community where there were multiple people impacted, and not just, you didn't just see them as community, but you like as a separate community, but they were your friends. They were people that you cared deeply about. Then you're going to be paying attention to the things that are going to impact them. And so then the next question is, well, but then everybody's impacted by all of these things. And it's like, yes, that is the reality.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So what do we do? What is it that we need to do? How can we be creative to build something different? Because I don't have all the answers. There's no way. I do not know everything about every issue. But if more people could join in and look at the way things are and say, hey, we need to do something about it, then I think we could start moving forward.
That's a really hopeful note to end on, the power of community and of friendship specifically, of really caring for one another and loving one another. And so I wonder, perhaps just as a final question for you, what are the qualities of friendship that you most value, and that you, especially in these times as we're heading into at least another 4 years of chaos, what are you looking for in friends, and who are you seeking to be as a friend?
I think it holds in with the theme. I honestly tend to get along well better with people who are doing that internal work. We all have to do it regardless of where we come from, and who are able to say, yeah, this is who I am, and this is what I'm doing, and this is what my life looks like. And people that see me too as a person, right? That they can also share what's going on in their lives and what's happening. I think in most relationships have that tension, because people very much know my life, and at least they think they know my life. And so they assume, like, oh, well, you're, already dealing, there's already so much on your plate. I can't add more to it, right? Like, for them to share about themselves. But that's actually very lonely, for both, right? Like, lonely for myself and lonely for them. Again, things, what is it? There's some quote that says that when shared, joy is multiplied and misery is lessened. And I think that is true. And so people who are able to take that risk and trusting me to also hold their story, and for each other then to hold our stories together, that's what I'm looking for. And those people that have been able to do that with me, like they do keep me alive. They keep me alive, and they give me life and hope. So that's what it is for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being in conversation today, Dr. Ramírez. It's been a privilege.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it.